Hi everyone, in this video we're going to be talking about how to use the quadratic formula. So this big thing right in the center I have right here is the quadratic formula, minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And so what the quadratic formula helps us do is it helps us solve quadratic equations. So you might be wondering, well, what's a quadratic equation? And so this right here is the general form for quadratic equations. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And so you might be given an equation that looks something like this, and your teacher exam might say, solve that equation for x. And so what we're going to need to do is use the formula to solve and figure out what x is. And so the way that you can tell whether something's a quadratic equation or not is by looking at the biggest exponent on the x. So in this example, we see right here that the biggest exponent is a 2. If the biggest exponent is a 2, that means it's a quadratic equation. If the biggest exponent isn't a 2, say it's 1 or 3 or 5, then it's not a quadratic equation. So you always want to look and make sure that the biggest exponent is a 2, and that tells you that we're dealing with a quadratic equation. There are some other ways to solve a quadratic equation besides the formula, but we'll talk about those in other videos, and we're just going to focus on the formula in this video. And another thing I want to mention is that the formula usually gives you 2 answers for x, and this comes from the fact that we have a plus or minus in the formula. But we'll see how that plays out when we do an example. And I know that this formula can look really daunting when you see it for the first time, but I promise that once you do a few examples and figure out what these A, B, and C's are, it's not that bad. So let's work into our first example. So the first example we're going to solve is 2x squared plus 2x minus 12 equals 0. And I know that this is a quadratic equation because the biggest exponent here is a 2. And so I've also put the quadratic formula over here for reference. So if you look at that formula, you see that there are A's, B's, and C's in it. So the first thing we need to do is figure out what A, B, and C are. So if you look back up at where we had our general form of the quadratic equation, you can see that A is the number in front of the x squared, B is the number in front of the x, and then C is the number that's just by itself. So we're going to use that to solve this example. So A is the number in front of the x squared. So here A is 2. And then B is the number in front of the x. So B is also 2. And then C is the number that's just by itself with no x attached to it. So here C is negative 12. So that's always going to be your first step, is figuring out what A, B, and C are. And I really recommend that you actually write it down on your paper. Don't just try to keep it in your head, because then that can get really confusing. So we have A is 2, B is 2, and C is negative 12. So the next thing we need to do is take all those numbers and just plug them into that formula. So let's do that. So the formula says we have minus b. Well, we know that b is 2. So if I plug that in, I get minus 2. And then we need to do plus or minus the square root of b, which is 2 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is negative 12. And then all of that gets divided by 2 times a, and a is 2. Awesome. So we plugged everything in, and now we just need to go through and do some simplifying. So out in the front, we have minus 2 plus or minus square root 2 squared is 4. So I can write that in, minus 4 times 2 times negative 12. And all of that is over 2 times 2. And 2 times 2 is the same thing as 4. So we can plug that in. So now we just got to keep doing more simplifying. So we have minus 2 plus or minus square root of 4. Okay, now we have 4 times 2 times negative 12. Well, 4 times 2 is 8, and 8 times negative 12 is negative 96. So we have 4 minus a negative 96 all over 4. Okay. More simplifying, square root. Well, a minus times a minus is a positive. So this turns into 4 plus 96 all over 4. And then minus 2 plus or minus square root. 4 plus 96 is 100. All of that's still over 4. Now I'm going to move this up here. So we have minus 2 plus or minus, well, the square root of 100 is 10. So we can put that in over 4. Okay, so this is where the plus or minus and the two answers come in. So we have right here minus 2 plus or minus 10 over 4. So this plus and minus is saying you're going to have two answers. One answer is the expression you get by doing negative 2 plus 10 over 4. And the other answer is the expression you get from doing minus 2 minus 10 over 4. So let me write that down and show you what I mean. So from here, we're going to have two answers. The first one is going to be negative 2 plus 10 over 4. And the other answer is going to be minus 2 minus 10 over 4. So whenever you get down to this point where you have that plus or minus there, you want to go ahead and split it into two answers, one with the plus, one with the minus. Okay, and so now that we've split it up like that, we can finish simplifying. So let's start with this one. So we have minus 2 plus 10 over 4. Well, we know that minus 2 plus 10 is 8. So that simplifies to 8 over 4. And 8 over 4 is equal to 2. Now let's do the other one. We have minus 2 minus 10, which is negative 12 over 4. And minus 12 divided by 4 is negative 3. So what did we just find out? We just solved this equation up here for x. And we discovered that x is equal to two things. X is equal to 2 or x is equal to negative 3. And so those would be your final answers. And you want to make sure that you put both answers because both answers are correct and both answers need to be included as part of this problem. So hopefully that makes sense and go rewatch that if you need to, but it's really just figuring out what A, B, and C are, plugging them into that formula, and then doing a bunch of simplifying. So we're going to do another example here where we have x squared plus 4x plus 2 equals 0. And again, here's the formula for reference. So first step, figure out what A, B, and C are. So if I look at this, A here is equal to 1, right? Because x squared is the same thing as 1x squared. If there's no number, if there's no coefficient in front of the x squared, it's implied that there's a 1 in front of the x squared. So A is equal to 1. B is the number in front of the x, so that is 4. And then C is equal to 2. So now that we know what A, B, and C are, we just need to plug them into this formula. So let's do that. So we have minus B, and B is 4. So we have minus 4 plus or minus square root B squared. B is 4, so we have 4 squared minus 4 times A, which is 1, times C, which is 2. And then all of that is over 2 times A, which is 1. Awesome. So we've plugged everything in. Now we just need to go through and simplify. So we still have that minus 4 out front, plus or minus square root. 4 squared is 16. So I can write that in. And 4 times 1 is 4. Times 2 is 8. So this turns into minus 8 in there. And then on the bottom, we have 2 times 1, which is the same thing as 2. Okay, now we can do some more simplifying. Minus 4 plus or minus 16 minus 8 is 8 over 2. Okay, and so now we have square root of 8. And square root of 8 isn't a very nice number, so I'm going to use the decimal approximation of square root 8 to finish this problem, but you could keep it as square root 8 if you wanted to keep your answer exact. But I'm going to use the fact that square root of 8 is approximately equal to 2.83. So I'm rounding to 2 decimals just for the purpose of this problem. Okay, so if we plug that in, we're going to have minus 4 plus or minus 2.83 over 2. So now, this is the point where we split this into two answers. One is going to be the answer with the plus in the expression, and the other is going to be the answer with the minus in the expression. Let me go through and fix that too. It's bad. Okay, So now we're going to split into two answers. One is going to be the minus 4 plus the 2.83 over 2. And then the other one is going to be the minus 4 minus the 2.83 over 2. Okay, so let's go through and finish simplifying this. We'll start with this one on the left. Minus 4 plus 2.83 is negative 1.17 over 2. And then negative 1.17 divided by 2 is approximately negative 0.59. So that's our first answer. Now let's do this one on the right. We have minus 4 minus 2.83, which is negative 6.83, and that's divided by 2. And then negative 6.83 divided by 2 is approximately negative 3.41. Okay, so what did we just do? We figured out that x is equal to negative 0.59 and negative 3.41. And let me go through and change these equal signs to approximately because I did round to 2 decimal places. So these would be your final answers. So we started with this equation up here, x squared plus 4x plus 2 equals 0. And we wanted to solve that for x, and we did. And we got 2 answers. X was about negative 0.59 and negative 3.41. So hopefully that makes sense. And when you're solving these problems using the quadratic formula, it doesn't get a whole lot trickier than this. It's really the same process over and over again. But really quick, I wanted to just mention a few common mistakes that I see students do a lot. And so I want to kind of warn you about them so that you don't do them. So this question number 3 right here, x squared minus 6x plus 5 equals 0. Students will look at this and go, okay, I need to figure out what A, B, and C are. And they'll say A is equal to 1, B is equal to 6, and C is equal to 5. So this is what students like to write. But this is not quite correct, and I encourage you to pause the video and see if you can figure out what is wrong with this. And so the thing that's wrong with this is that B is not equal to 6, B is equal to negative 6. So, and that's because there's that negative sign in front of the 6 in the equation. So students will kind of they'll forget about it or not realize that there's a negative in front of that number, but that negative is important. It's not a positive 6 in the equation, it's a negative 6, and that will definitely change the answer you get. So make sure that you carry the negatives if they're there. And then the other thing is this problem number 4, 3x squared plus 2x plus 6 equals 10. Students will look at this and go, okay, got to figure out what A, B, and C are. So I don't want to highlight. They'll say A is equal to 3, B is equal to 2, and C is equal to 6. So again, try to pause the video and see if you can figure out what is wrong with this. So at first it looks right, like, okay, well, the number in front of the x squared is 3, the number in front of the x is 2, and the number by itself is 6. But it's the right-hand side of this equation that has a problem. So if you remember from the general form of a quadratic equation that I gave you up here, do you see how there's a 0 on the right side of the equation? That 0 is really, really important. You can only apply and use the quadratic formula when there's a 0 on the right-hand side of the equation. If there's not a 0 on the right-hand side of the equation, you need to do some extra work before you can use the formula. So back in this example, where we have the 10 on the right side, what we would need to do is we would need to get it to be a 0 on the right side before we apply the formula. And how can we do that? How can we get rid of the 10 that's on the right side? Well, why don't we subtract 10 from both sides? So if we subtract 10 from both sides of the equation, we're going to have 3x squared plus 2x. 6 minus 10 is minus 4. And then on the right-hand side, 10 minus 10 is 0. So now this equation is in a form where we're okay to use the quadratic formula. So now A would be equal to 3, B would be equal to 2, and C would be equal to negative 4. So it really does make a difference, and it's going to change your answer whether or not the right-hand side has 0 on it. So if you ever see a number other than 0 on the right-hand side, make sure you subtract or add it to the other side so that the right-hand side has 0. And then lastly, this equation right here, x squared plus x minus 5 equals 0. When students go to write what A, B, and C are, they'll get tripped up sometimes because they'll look at this and think, well, there's no number in front of the x squared and there's no number in front of the x. So what do I do? What do I put? But remember, if there's no coefficient in front of the x squared, what's implied is that there's really a 1 in front of it. So x squared is the same thing as 1x squared, and x is the same thing as 1x, right? Because 1 times any number is just that number. 1 times 5 is just 5. So if it's ever missing a coefficient in the front, that really just means the coefficient is 1. So in this example, A would be 1, B would be 1, and C would be -5. And then you could use those numbers and put them in the formula. So I'm not going to solve examples 3, 4, and 5 in this video, but I will put the solutions in the description. So I encourage you to try to work those out yourself using the formula and then compare it to the answers in the description. And then lastly, just some advice for if you're a high school student and you're learning this. I really, really recommend that you memorize the formula, the quadratic formula. I know that doesn't sound fun and it's probably the last thing you want to do, but if you're going to take any more math at all, you are going to use this all the time. I still use it on a pretty regular basis. So it's really, really worth memorizing it. So that way you don't have to look it up all the time, especially on an exam, because a lot of times the formula isn't given to you on an exam either. So really just memorize it. And then also there are a bunch of online calculators that you can use to check your work. So if you just Google, quadratic equation solver, any of the first 10 things that come up will probably work, and it'll let you type the equation you're solving into the calculator, and then you hit calculate, and then it'll tell you what the answers for X are. And so that's a really easy way for you to check your work. So I hope that this video is helpful for all of you. If you have any questions or comments or any other things you want to see, please leave those in the comments and make sure to subscribe. Thanks.